Podcast with me, Carly. Hope you are all well, witches. On today's episode, we are talking Ancestral Connection with Callie White, ancestral healing practitioner. She is the creatrix responsible for the month-long exhibition I Am Witch Tales from the Roundhouse that took place in Lancaster, UK in 2022. This is being followed this year by a 4-day festival of history and healing called the Witches Revival. Callie will be talking to us about how ancestral connection links to our well-being and how we can reclaim our ancestral witchy powers. Before we get into our book review, I just wanted to explain why I've been so quiet. I finally moved into my house after having the keys for a little while. I was stuck in my old place with the sale. I moved in a couple of weeks ago, and I truly underestimated the impact that moving and selling and, all the stress would have on me. I just kind of crumbled once we got here. My nervous system was an absolute mess. I was just burnt out after 15 months of selling and moving stress. It's still going on in some respects. It's certainly been one of the worst processes I've gone through. It definitely has done a number on my mental health. I know this is very much first world problems. Moving just does weird things to you. The selling process is truly archaic. On the plus side, where we are is amazing. We have wheat and cornfields on our road. There are tons of footpaths through fields. I have been out in the wild spotting bats, red kite hawks, rabbits, swallows, skylarks, all manner of butterflies. I've been a real townie examining everything, and it's definitely helped my mental health in getting me back together after so much stress. I also joined the local library, which is so cute. It's a really tiny one. It's only open for a few hours a day, run by volunteers. When I was in there, the vicar was in there, and I just heard this lady ask him, "Are you doing the service on Sunday, vicar?" And I just felt like I was a character in an episode of Last of the Summer Wine or Midsummer Murders or something like that. It was giving me that main character energy of that woman who relocates to the tiny countryside village, and I'm here for it. I must say, I was really impressed with our little library, even more so because on joining, I realised that once you register, a lot of the books that they have in circulation in the borough are amazing. I went through my entire Goodreads account, and I found around 90% of the books on my wish list to read are within the library circulation. And I've managed to save a little wish list on my library account of ones that I want to read to remind me. I've already managed to pick up a number of them or reserve them. And you can also, depending on where you are, there's like a Libby app, which is free. Certain other areas have other online apps, and these will have audiobooks on them or books that you can read on a device. I have been in former years a real book consumer, and it's a lot of money. Like, it's a lot of money saving, like collecting books. I do buy a lot of secondhand books. I use sites like World of Books and so on. This is by no means sponsored by the Library of World of Books or anything like that. But I just think that it is worth me supporting my local library more. So I'm on a book ban currently and working on me just borrowing library books. I even managed to pick up our book for our August Literary Witches Coven read on there. And one of our lovely Patreons said about libraries being the lifeblood of a community. And I happen to agree. Perhaps you might consider using your own library. A lot of the books I have recommended on the show, you should definitely be able to find copies there. If I really love a book after borrowing it from the library, I will buy a copy to keep. I just realise how lucky I am to have access to these facilities and so many lovely books to borrow. So there you have it, my new intention. Talking about the Literary Witches Coven and Patreon, our book for August is The Change, written by Kirsten Miller, if you want to join us for that. Anyway, the book I borrowed from the library is absolutely amazing. That book is Magic Lessons by Alice Hoffman. This is the author of Practical Magic. If you loved the film Practical Magic, you will adore this book with every fibre in your being. This is an amazing one. I say that after reading her other book, The Rules of Magic, which I didn't enjoy so much. This is part of the Practical Magic story. I've never read Practical Magic, as I have been warned that the film was so different to the book. I love the film so much, I didn't want to ruin it, so just stayed clear of that book. This book, however, if this was made into a film during the 90s, much like the original Practical Magic, this, in my humble opinion, would be an absolute classic. I say that as the 90s smashed it on the witch films front with films like Hocus Pocus, Practical Magic, The Addams Family, and of course a little bit later on in the noughties with Harry Potter. This book is the true origins of the Owens family, specifically Maria Owens, and what a character she is. Here is the book's blurb. For centuries, the women of the Owens family have been cursed. Any man who loves an Owens woman will die. It begins with a baby abandoned in a snowy English field in the 1600s. Gentle Hannah Owens takes the baby in, and as the child grows, Hannah teaches little Maria about the unnamed arts. Maria has a gift for them, a gift that may well prove her undoing. When Maria is abandoned by the man she loves, she invokes the curse that will haunt her family for centuries, because magic has rules and they must be obeyed. Maria Owens was everything you could ask for as a witchy protagonist. She has her own crow. She travels a good part of the world. She is absolutely fearless, despite how life attempts to smash the crap out of her spirit. A true wild woman in every sense of the word, right down to her red witchy boots that she prizes. This is one of the coziest witch books I have read in a long time. The writing is so beautiful. Despite it being a chunky book, I could not put this down. Absolutely enchanted. We get to understand the Owens sisters' curse, but I was more interested in their practice of providing magic to women, especially around love. There is much to be said about love throughout this book, family and romantic love. The relationships throughout this book are beautiful, be it mother and daughter, teacher and lover, plus the acquaintances they meet along the way. There are some great villains too, who you will love to hate. This book is up there for me with The Secret History of Witches, another of my faves. I wholeheartedly recommend. Give this 5 out of 5. Great if you want to reconnect with being a witch and feeling witchy as hell. Let me leave you with these words from the book, which caused me to shed a little tear. Drink chamomile tea to calm the spirit. Feed a cold and starve a fever. Read as many books as you can. Always choose courage. Never watch another woman burn. Know that love is the only answer. Join me after the break to talk all about ancestral connections. Welcome back. I am here with the wonderful Callie White. Hello, Callie. Love to have you on.
Thank you, Carly. It's great to be here.
I'm ever so excited because I have been following Callie's journey for a little while now. So Callie is a psychotherapist and ancestral healing practitioner focused on healing the generational wounds rooted in the European witch hunts of 1450 to 1750. Her work is born out of her own ancestral healing journey, which included a 13-moon pilgrimage around the UK and Ireland, which she undertook in 2019 as a way of deepening her own ancestral connections. Guided by spirit, she gathered women in ceremony every full moon to honour the women persecuted as witches and to bring healing to the collective trauma patterns of separation. This led to a pioneering month-long exhibition called I Am Witch Tales from the Roundhouse in Lancaster, UK in 2022, which is being followed this year by a 4-day festival of history and healing called the Witches Revival. Callie believes that ancestral connection is a key to health and well-being and is passionate about helping others reclaim their ancestral witchy powers. Oh, it's so exciting. And we are meeting today on an actual full moon as well, which feels very poignant. So yeah, it's great to have you on today, Callie. Callie, there's so much I want to get into with you, but I must admit, off the bat, I'm a witch who has often resisted looking into my ancestors and ancestral healing, much like someone would in respect of shadow work. Can you give, I'm just being really honest here, can you give us some insight into ancestral connection and why you believe it's important to delve into?
Yeah, great place to start. And yeah, the resistance, you're not alone in that. I think that's true for lots of us. And you know, the ancestral realm and ancestral connection is a very rich place to go, and it's one that's really it's changed my life, to be honest. And that's, you know, that's why I'm really passionate about kind of, you know, sharing more about it. And just, you know, it's like an invitation for people to think a little bit more about it. And because we are so I guess that a helpful way to start, a place to start to think about this is we have, when you hear the word ancestor, most of us would think about recent ancestors, like sometimes parent, depending on how old we are, sometimes parents or grandparents or aunties or uncles, but people who we have known in our lives that have passed over. So they're kind of like the recent ancestors, you know, the ones whose stories are still accessible and known within our family dynamic. Then we have the ancient ancestors. So then we can think about all of the people that went before us. And so, you know, this, for me, this really came alive in the context of history. So like we, you know, we have history lessons at school. And for me, I found history a bit boring, because what I realized now was it didn't really have any context. And with ancestral work, it's like, oh, like if I go all the way back through the timeline of this land, right? I'm from England. I'm from, you know, from the UK. So this land, my lineage, goes all the way back through. You've got the Normans that invaded, the Anglo-Saxons, the Vikings, the Romans, the Celtic people, and all the way back to the Neolithics. So it's like starting to think about those people. That's not something abstract. They were real people from whom I have descended from. And through doing that, we can gain so much in our modern lives today. Like what part of my search was, I was searching for some kind of spiritual connection, and I'd gone to other traditions, other belief systems, other cultures to try and find that. The Native American culture was one that really drew me, I think, because of the connection to the land. And we talk about indigenous roots, and so the question came, where are my indigenous roots? They're there, but I have to go back 2,000 years to find them, to kind of the Neolithic and the Celtic times, the stone circles, the long barrows. But if you look at any indigenous culture, they all honor and revere their ancestors. And we find that our ancestors here did that too. If you go up to the Neolithic, the village up on the Orkneys, for example, they've discovered bodies like skeletons, like the barrows in the homes and under the doors of the homes, right? So that's like, imagine burying your grandparents at the threshold of your house, of your home. It's like that kind of tells us something about the importance of the ancestors to those people. And in times when life was about survival, and there wasn't, like, you can't just nip down to the corner shop for milk or bread, right? And you can't, there's no, the clothes that you wear, you or someone in your tribe has had to make them, right? You have to hunt the animals for the leather, or the sheep for the wool, or whatever. Like the ancestral wisdom was fundamental to survival. Like you couldn't take anything for granted. And so that for me, that was a question of like, wow, what the ancestors are really important. And okay, I'm not so dependent on the wisdom these days, but by thinking about them, by honoring them, by bringing them into my life, what I've found, I mean, it's like I said, it's been life-changing. So it's like it's really given me a sense of who I am and where I've come from, like an anchor point into my own life, that I am part of a continuum. I'm not alone here. Like there are 100, imagine if you just imagine your mother's behind you, then your grandmother, then your great grandmother, and great great, like it goes back and back and back for thousands of years. There's like you only have to go back 11 generations, and there's 2,048 people just like from your mother and your father standing behind you. 2,048 people in 11 generations that you're carrying their direct bloodline. It's like isn't that mind-blowing? Like when you draw that out, you've got 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great grandparents, 16, 32, 64, it doubles, like all these people. And what I've found is, that we can talk about the gifts and the wounds within ancestral work. And the gifts are like, like these people, they were strong, they were resilient, they were creative, they were resourceful. That they have, like, every single one of their lives matters. Like if one of them hadn't survived to give birth, or we wouldn't be here now in the form that we are, like in this life. And and all of those strengths and gifts, the resilience, the creativity, the intelligence, that, you know, all of it's like that, all of that memory is in our bones, like it's in our DNA. It's accessible, it's available to us. And when we start, what I found is, you know, with regular practice, with regular honoring, that starts to come through, like, and it gives us you know, builds our resilience. It builds a stronger sense of who we are, and that our lives matter, that the decisions we make affect the future generations, and that, you know, we have power, we have control, we have, you know, when we're not victims here, we have agency and autonomy, and with that comes empowerment for our own lives. Like, we can make choices. So there's a lot, you know, and just like grounding, like you know, we're living in a really fast-paced, very complex time, especially with technology, and life demands so much of us. Like, we're pulled this way, we're pulled that way, we've got so many priorities, and it can be easy to lose ourselves in that. And so, you know, just slowing down a bit and anchoring into our ancestral connection can be like a way home. It can really ground us into what's important here, what really matters to me, what can I let go of, you know, how can I simplify my life, and in that make more space for all the good stuff of joy and connection, and, you know, all of that. So so that you know, that's kind of like my way in of like laying out the ancestral stall. And I yeah, like, there's so much to be gained, positive stuff to be gained from that. And I read about a study recently with children, where they found that children who had an understanding of their family history, right? So kids that had a, you know, like, you're sitting around the Sunday dinner table, which, you know, do we still do, how many people still do that?
Yeah,
You know, but kids that were told the stories of people in their family, their ancestors, you know, they were told about their grandfather that, you know, maybe died before they were born, or they were told about their aunties or their uncles or whatever. When kids have a sense of their family, their levels of resilience increased. And so when stressful events happened, those kids with a sense of who they were, with a sense of their family connection, fared much better than the kids who didn't have. So it, you know, that speaks volumes to me.
powerful stuff.
Feels
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. I find that study fascinating. And yes, you're right. I think there is a tendency to often, as a collective, look forward and not always look back. And I have long had a bit, I've always had a bit of an obsession of going through, you know, the old stories with my parents and grandparents when they were around and so on. And, you know, I think my parents always used to think I was a little bit odd because I just always wanted to not live in the past, but always regurgitate all the old stories over and over again. And you do find certain ancestors or people that, you know, you hear stories of that really do resonate with you, or that you feel a particular fascination with. But also, I think we underestimate how interesting people in our family might be, because, you know, sometimes you think that these legends are out there in, you know, in history, in, you know, in other people's families, and, you know, and when you go through your background of your own, there's certain characters within mine that are just fascinating. Some that might have had less stories, but their nature was lovely, and, you know, you'd hear all about that through other members of the family. I'll give a funny little story with my own, because I was going to ask you about kind of getting into researching and looking at your ancestral lines. we've got a member of our family who did a whole family tree, and she went back centuries and centuries. But the funny thing was that it was almost like she looked at it through how she wanted it to look and appear. And she was a little bit hyacinth bouquet, this particular member of my family. I have to be really careful. And it was almost like my dad said, well, I remember this member of the family, and it's like she's eradicated them. She just, like, no, they're not good enough for our family, they're not staying in it. Till we got to the point where I think it got a little bit bandy, and she was like, yes, I'm sure we're related to Swedish aristocracy. And my dad's there like, not sure about that. I think you may have to do it for yourself to check that it's actually genuine. And because I think some people can get a little bit romanticized with it, and there's good and bad through every lineage, but it was just really sadly maybe a little bit of a history that I won't kind of trust all of it within. But yeah, I think I'd be very keen to look into my own. And I wondered, Callie, if you had any ways that what you did yourself to look at your background.
Yeah, okay, so there's quite a few different ways in. And what I've found over the last few years with, working with people and running workshops on this and stuff is that we all have a different way. Like, what's important is we find our own way. And tracing our family tree, like you've just described, is one way. And these days with all the websites like ancestry.com and 123me and all of that, the whole field is it's opening up and it's becoming easier. Although you have to submit your DNA to them, so that you need to think about that, if that's right for you or not in using those websites. But yeah, tracing the family tree, it can be a fascinating journey. And I worked with, and then so the question, what goes alongside that is, why are we doing it? What's the purpose of it? And for me, it's about healing and growth, right? So I've talked about there's a lot of the gifts, a lot of the strengths and the resiliences, and and sometimes we can find like, this person was a glove maker, and I love, and I've got this like, passion for sewing and gloves, and I had no idea where that came from. And three generations removed, there's an aunt that was a glove maker or whatever. So we can kind of like find out more about ourselves and our interests and what we're called to through it. And also then come the wounds, right? You just started to touch on that. So there's gifts and there's wounds, and in every family tree there are people who were kind and loving and people who weren't. And so it's almost, it's like, this is where why are we doing this? Like, for our own healing, what the ancestors can show us is like mirrors to our own good bits and bad bits, our our shadow and our light. And seeing that we have the capacity for all of it is really important. It's humbling. It's it helps build compassion. It helps build empathy. Like, there's so many reasons to do it. So if tracing your family tree is good. And I just an example of one way of working with that. So there was one of the women that was part of the exhibition last year. She had traced her generation, her mother line, so mother, grandmother, great grandmother, etc., the women of that that blood lineage back 13 generations. Wow. And she had all of the names, and she had some of the stories. She had some factual things, and obviously you go back 13 generations, you're in the 1700s, so the facts were missing. And so she used a shamanic journey technique, like a way of connecting that with them energetically, spiritually, whatever you want to call that. And what she did was she'd been collecting these beautiful handmade white lace handkerchiefs for the last God knows however many years. And she had no idea why she was collecting them. And she got to this piece of work and she realized she had 13.
Oh.
And so she used them, one for each of the women, and then embroidered their names, and she had their dates of birth and dates of death, and sometimes where they lived and when they were married and stuff. And then and so she embroidered a hanky for each of them to honor them, to kind of as a place for holding the information about them, some of the what came through in her journeys about them, and then stitched them all together in this big, long, beautiful, like like a lineage, a piece of cloth. And that was her piece for the exhibition. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful. And that's something that she is going to treasure forever and then pass to her daughter. And maybe it becomes a tradition. So there's some really beautiful ways we can work with our ancestors, that bring in our creativity, that bring in ritual, that bring in ceremony. One of the simplest ways is to create an ancestral altar, be that in your home or in your garden. It could have photographs, it can have objects from nature, it can have objects that have been passed down through the family. You can make stuff. There's absolutely no right or wrong. A candle, but just having somewhere in your home that you pass by it like it triggers my ancestors. It brings them into your awareness. It brings them into your consciousness, that they are there, that they're part of me, that I'm part of them, that they're part, that my story's connected to theirs. So that's a really simple way. And I'm sure most of your listeners will already have altars, and I'm sure many people have got ancestral altars, but using them as living, breathing things can be really magical. The other thing is so there's the near ancestors, the recent ancestors, but then the more ancient ones, and then in connecting back with our indigenous roots. For me, it was about walking the land. It was about going to stone circles, going to burial chambers, long barrows, learning about the history, just going slow, taking time, sitting there for hours sometimes, and just listening, just feeling and listening and dropping in. And it's incredible, some of the magic that happens in these places, and also getting into our history through the lens of ancestors was also really powerful for me. So on my pilgrimage, I went to Hastings, the Battle of Hastings, and learned all about that, and the Jorvik Centre in York, and learned about the Vikings. And I went to the Shakespeare Centre in Stratford, and is it not Stratford, and kind of went into Shakespeare and his times and the history of that, and all through the everywhere. We have such a rich history on this land, and like the old stories, the Celtic stories, like this Scotland's just oozing with it, Wales and Ireland, that it's like everywhere. So the old stories, learning the old stories, walking the land, going to the sacred places, the historical sites, is it's a magical journey we can take on. We can take that it's all about learning about ourselves, ultimately bringing ourselves home to who we really are and what really matters. So yeah, I hope that don't know if that helps. I hope that
Really,
helps.
really, Callie, you've got my brain going. So there's a few things I wanted to kind of contribute to this, because the first thing you said was about your connection to the land and how you were saying about the indigenous people. Funnily enough, we're reading Braiding Sweet Grass by
Oh, lovely.
Chimera within Patreon for our literary witches coven, and there's a
Okay.
lot that she talks on that, and that book is so valuable for looking at the connection with the land of the indigenous people. But I also feel the same with you, and I found that I was very into like root work and so on, and the more and more I looked at my background, I started to piece together and realise, for me, a lot of the cunning folk work always relates very similarly to some of the root work, like a lot of the old folk magic. So that sort of set me off on a little bit of it's amazing how much I think ancestral work can really, if you're a practicing witch, or if you just your spiritual beliefs and so on, it can really kind of infiltrate into what you do there. Because for me, that really set me off on my hedge witch sort of path. Once I got to understand more about ancestrally, what we did with the land, and little things that it came into magic. Even my dad has got stories of my great grandmas and things like that, and little things that they did which were incredibly witchy, but they wouldn't have thought it at the time. But also, so there are certainly like our own links to the land throughout our own histories, as I know you touched on, which I found fascinating. But also coming back to the kids aspect and obviously talking to them about ancestors and so on. One of the ways that really ran through our family with that was food, because my grandma was a real amazing cake maker and baker. She'd always make a lot of the old recipes, and I feel like that's kind of filtered into my craft as well, by continuing those recipes, keeping those to pass down to my daughter, things like that. Some of them are like years and years old, from like my great grandmother, great grandmother, and my nan would tell me all the stories of those through creating those dishes and so on, which I find with children was a wonderful way to share those stories and for them to have an interest in it. And obviously there's food at the end of it, so always a joy. But for me, kind of the ancestral work that I have done, which isn't a huge amount, a bit like you, like the fascination of who we are connected to. I found out I had loads of Swedish ancestry, so obviously that got my craft to be very Norse based. I started to look into the Norse gods, and it's even looking at the the Saxons and everything. It's amazing how much it can just pique your interest and set you off down rabbit holes, and you're like, I'm going to start doing this, and that's got me interested in this deity or this way of living. So it really is, life enhancing, and can really make your life richer through doing these as well. Coming back to the aspect. Sorry, Callie, did you add to that?
No, and I think you're that's so true, and that's why I say, like, it's a personal journey for all of us. It's different for all of us, and what we see through the lineages is that we're so mixed up now as a what does it mean to be British? Like, we've got Normans, we've got Vikings, we've got Anglo-Saxons, we've got Romans, we've got we're so mixed up, and some of us are called to different places. Some of us are, we're called, lots of witchy women are called to to Egypt or to South America, or it's like there's no right or wrong with this if we're doing it with awareness and reverence. And what's really important is we follow our own thread. Like, this thread, the ancestors offer us threads that are deep in our psyche, and the magic comes when we say yes to following that thread, and just being open to seeing where it takes us, and what feels right and wrong, right and wrong for us, what feels right for us. That's really important with this. So I love that you're a bit Swedish.
I did when I found out.
Yeah.
Honestly, I was really shocked actually, but no, I think you know, all the bits that I've found have been particularly fascinating, and yeah, I definitely want to get more into it, and I'm basing that off of just records we've got without even doing DNA tests or anything like that. I wanted to ask you, because that kind of, this is what I was you know, touching on when I said about the ancestral work, because I mean, how do you see ancestral issues affect an individual in the work that you do?
Okay, so we're gonna get into the wound side of it now, and um, there's for me there's two levels to this. One is the personal level, and the other is the collective level.
Yeah.
So on a personal level, like so science has proven now through epigenetics that trauma is passed down through the generations, right? So it's like we're carrying the wounds of our ancestors. An example of that is grief. Like if there's a wisdom quote that says grief is passed down through the generations until somebody is willing to feel it. So when we trace our when we trace our lineages, when we start to think about our ancestors, like lives were really hard for so many people. Like when you look at the themes of what our ancestors have lived through, like displacement from land, from homes, struggling to survive and earn a living, the loss of babies, like not so long ago, women were having 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 babies, and the infant mortality rate was really high, and 1 in 2, I think it's 1 in 2 babies died before the age of 2 back in the 1600s. So there's a lot of loss, there's grief in the lineage, in the field, that for me wasn't always wasn't worked through. There's that we'll get onto the witch hunts, because that's like a whole thing in itself. But we can be carrying repressed or unprocessed trauma from the lives of our ancestors. So an example, so a woman I worked with was exploring motherhood, and this part in her head, she wanted to have children, but in her heart and in her body, it was like she was afraid. There was this massive fear and this big block. And she did lots of inner work and was trying to figure it out and get to the bottom of it, and then kind of started to connect with her ancestors, and went to visit an old grandmother that was she hadn't kind of really had a relationship with growing up. And she spends a couple of days with this grandmother who and asking questions, and they're talking about the stories, and what she finds is that this grandmother's mother, the great grandmother, had lost 9 out of 10 babies.
Wow.
So there's this huge fear then of, imagine that, like you have a baby and you lose it, and then you have another baby and you lose it, and you have a baby and you lose it, and are they going to survive? Like there's this fear that the babies aren't going to survive. And when things like this happen, it's like this goes deep into our psyche, into our unconscious, on levels that we can be so unaware of, because our attention is so consumed with the busyness of the day, and getting breakfast ready and getting the kids ready for school and getting this done and getting to work and but when we really drop in, this is why slowing down is really important, and making time for ourselves is really important in our practice. That these things are still in, these things are, we're holding these things, we're carrying these things that haven't originated in us. And so hearing that story for this woman just made everything make sense. That's a, it's a great example of how things are passed down, especially fear, so when we're talking about the wounds, we're talking about, the shadow, the parts of ourselves that we don't want to own, we don't want to look at, we don't want to even acknowledge is there. Sometimes we don't even know it's there. But we're talking about our grief, we're talking about our rage, we're talking about fear, and we're talking about shame. Like shame is a massive one for us as women. And if you go back to the Victorian times, like you have the witch hunts that were kind of like 1500s, 1600s, on the whole, and then we get into the 1700s and the Industrial Revolution, and then the 1800s and the Victorian times. It's like the oppression of women, the tightening of women, and what women were allowed to do and what was appropriate and what wasn't, and the conformity. It's like it increases and increases and increases, and it's like I kind of see the Victorian times as the real pinnacle of the top of that was the most oppressed time. And it's just, there's so much fear, like was it your auntie we're talking about, who's erased people out of the family tree because they weren't good enough, right? They weren't of a good enough standing. Like that was a massive concern for Victorian times. Like it brings us to the class system in this country, which is still very alive and well. And let's think about that. Let's have a think, really challenge that thinking and try and understand it. And where, is it helpful, or how does it hold us back? Because in reality, we can do, we have freedoms. We can do what we want. Like we can live our lives how we want at the minute, anyway. In this country. So some of those, the fear and the oppression and the beliefs and the behaviors get passed down. So there's that, it passes down on the personal level. So doing our personal ancestral work can help understand and open up things for us on that level. But then understanding the collective is also really important. And this is where, for me, this is where I really got into the history of the witch hunts. I was never really called to the witch before this. And I wasn't someone that practiced magic, or I was kind of, I was on a spiritual journey, and I was rooting into the land, but I would never have called myself a witch. Like I still have trouble with that in some instances. But what I uncovered, so when I was doing training to be an ancestral healing practitioner, using a shamanic drum journey technique, like using that as the way of accessing, I was practicing every day, and it was the ancestors from the witch hunts, from the burning times, that started to come through in my journeys, and they would show me what happened to their lives. And that was like then seeing, and it was the mirror, and then understanding what I was carrying in my own body somatically. And they weren't all witches. It was what they showed me was how life, like the witch hunts affected everyone in the community, men, women, and children. And what we're dealing with is the whole dynamic of victim and perpetrator, and that we can be both, right? We're not all the victims here. We can be horrible. We can be cruel. We can be nasty. We have that. I'm not saying we all are, but we have the capacity to be, right? And it's rooted in survival. It's rooted in group group think and group, the in group, the out group. And again, it's like you go back to the indigenous times and people living in tribes. You needed the tribe to survive. The tribes were smaller. You knew everybody in them, 80 to 100 people. And so some of the dynamics that are playing out now are a natural evolutionary part of what it means to be human, right? We want to be liked, we want to belong, we want to be part of the group.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like the drive and the motivation for that has become so over exaggerated, like our lives depend on it,
Yeah.
when they actually don't. Like we don't, so how this, I'm just going here, Collie. I hope that's all right.
Yeah, no,
I
I'm
think
with you.
I've gone off
I am with
topic,
you on
but
this, and I can certainly kind of add to this. But no, keep going, Kelly. So I'm completely with you where this point is going.
so we're talking about the collective field and
Yeah.
and what it took to survive. And during the witch hunts, yes, were born out of the Catholic Church to a
Mm-hmm.
degree, and the Malleus Maleficarum was written by a Dominican monk with support from the Pope at the time, and it is probably one of the most misogynistic books you could ever read.
Yeah.
And that was, it was written at the time of the invention of the printing press. So it was one of the first books that went nationwide and across Europe. So it fell into the hands of those who had power at the time, right? The church, the gentry, the landowners, what have you. And so yes, we can see that, at the beginning there was it came from above, like hunting out witches, the belief that witches were in league with the devil, had renounced Christ in their baptism, and were a danger. Like they were, their magic was evil, and they needed to be rooted out. That kind of came top down to begin with. But what we see as it evolves, and it's, it's a complex period of history, and it's different for each European country. But what we see here, particularly in England and in Scotland, is communities, people within the community turning against each other. So women turning against women, becoming the accusers, men not being able to protect their wives, children having to witness, what happens to their mother because she's been a little bit outspoken. And, this was a time of immense fear and huge suspicion. Like, it's times of war, it's times of famine, there's been plagues. The church is becoming increasingly dogmatic. And so fear and anxiety is high amongst the population, and then suspicion arises easily. So something, if you think about, like we talk about, there's evidence that lots of the women persecuted as witches were older women.
Yes.
And in those days,
about.
yeah, so older women, this is a time when women weren't legally allowed to earn money for themselves. Their labor wasn't rewarded financially. So you actually did need a man to survive, or a family. And if you didn't have that, which many women didn't, because men, had gone off to war and lost their lives, or had died in accidents or fires, or, whatever. There were a lot, high numbers of widows who were dependent on their communities to survive, right? So imagine you go to your neighbor, you want a cup of milk or something, and the neighbor hasn't got anything to spare, and says no, and you kind of, the old woman's cold and tired and grumpy, and she's kind of walks down the garden path muttering under her breath, friggin' schmiggin'
Yeah.
riggin', and then 2 weeks later the neighbor's cow dies
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
of a bacterial infection, but that's something that they don't know anything about in those days. It's easy to make the conclusion that the old woman's cursed the cow, therefore she's a witch, therefore she needs to be rooted out, therefore the village bands together against her. So what how the dynamics affected men and women, but and my work particularly is focused on the dynamics in the relationships between women, because I'd done a lot of women's work over the years, sat in lots of women's circles, and always had this sense of slight, mistrust. Can I really trust this? What,
Yeah. Yeah.
do these women really have my back? And then,
Yeah.
and noticing my own shadows around, when I would judge or criticize other women, when I felt envious about them, when I was constantly comparing myself to other women. These are all dynamics that, to a degree, are a normal part of being human,
Yeah.
but have been massively amplified and exaggerated by the trauma that's been passed down through the generations. And I really saw a root of this in the times of the witch hunts.
I think this conversation is so powerful, especially what you said about older women. And there's two things that come up for me, I feel, in modern day, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but it's kind of a repeated theme that I see, where obviously when it came to persecution and so on, it was the older woman, because like when they were like the younger women, they had more value, they were still perhaps at marriage age, childbearing age. A lot of the things that I've read are obviously, as the women got older, they were less willing to kind of not say anything when they were being persecuted. They would sort of fight back a bit more. And I feel like the crone aspect is still such an issue nowadays around aging and how we respond to aging, and how we we still feel that we've got this need to perpetually look young and not embrace getting older. And I feel like some of that's tied to that as well, because people being shunned as they get older. That's one thing that I feel that perhaps is maybe messages that I've heard through being a woman, growing up, things that are said to you, and they have got very old origins. There's an episode for the podcast that I'm going to do on the crone, because I feel this is a really important topic. And I do feel like there is this element in the collective currently where we're always kind of fighting getting old, and always, I'm not somebody to, I'm always live and let live, do what you want to yourself. But there is a lot of this collective, we must continue to be young and not age and so on. Whereas a little part of me is the opposite, and I see aging is a wonderful thing, and my mum's always encouraged, and we've had a lot of conversations around this. But I do believe for women as a collective, there is a lot of pressure around that, and also how older women are disregarded. And when I say older women, I mean I've turned 40 last year, and I know that's not by any means any age. Like I don't believe it is. When I was in my 20s, I would have thought I was ancient. But I do feel that we regard age, and especially women, in a terrible way. And it's got very old origins, in my personal opinion. I don't know if you're of the same thoughts on this, Callie.
Oh, I could talk for hours about this. Yeah, yeah. What you're speaking to is something really important. And if we think about value, so how are we valued? It's like, because we've lost our ancestral connection, which over the, which gives us a sense of who we are. It's like we're then more vulnerable to believing what society tells us
Yes.
who we are, and what we see. I mean, that is youth-centric media is everywhere. Like, I grew up with it. I'm 10 years on from you. You've grown up with it. It's still going on. Like, changes are being made, but it still goes on. That the value, women's value, it's two things. It's your sexual attractiveness, right, and your
Yes.
ability to procreate, and it's your ability to care for others. So our life experience, our wisdom, our creativity, our intelligence, all of that has kind of was like, it was cut off. It hasn't been recognized, it hasn't been valued. It's like we've been valued on those two things, and therefore older women have absolutely no value. Once you've gone through menopause, once you can't take care of, once you can't give birth anymore,
Yeah.
then you're of no value to society. And there's an indigenous piece of wisdom around this, which is, if you want to destroy the village, if you want to destroy the tribe and the village, the easiest way to do that is to take out the grandmother lodge.
Wow.
Because the grandmothers, the indigenous people knew that the crone wisdom, crone coming from the word crowned, that
Yeah.
crone wisdom was vital to the survival of the tribe. And it's vital because all of this work came through for me as I was going through my perimenopause. And now as a menopausal woman, and now all the symptoms have settled, like I can't tell you, Carly, I have never felt better. I feel so like the best in myself I've ever felt. Like, I know who I am, I know what I'm about, I know what interests me. I'm not bothered about having to fit in anymore. I can hold paradox, like the live and let live. I can see the beauty and the diversity of life. Like, all of this, like the menopause is it's our third rite of passage as women. Starting our menses is the first one, giving birth is the second, and then menopause. And and again, I know it can be hard, right? It's physically really hard for lots of women, but if we can bring in the spiritual aspect of it rather than just focus on the physical changes in our bodies, it's a portal to and a gateway to so much more wisdom and a shifted perspective on life, and a completely different sense of who we are, and how we can bring value, right? And so it is, there's lots of menopause work coming through now, which is great. It's up to us to bring it back. It's up to us to really start talking about it again, start sharing our stories about it, and to really start questioning the societal and cultural ideals of what a woman is. Like, we are more than our looks and our sexual attractiveness. That that is part of it, and that is important. Like, when we're fully connected to that, it's powerful. Like, our inner Aphrodite, or the temptress energy, I call it, like that when we're younger, that there's a deep connection with our creative life force energy, and that's been shut down. The womb work is important for this, and that energy is still there when we go through menopause and beyond, but it manifests differently. you know, and I've found it hard. Like I still find it hard. Like I'm losing my looks and I don't get looked at by men in the same way. And it's like, oh my God, like I don't know how to be in the world anymore, right? So it's a bit of a journey. Like I'm having to navigate that and find out, and how do I be, like how do I, you know, my relationship with men, and what, you know, what does that mean, and other women and young women and older women, and like where do I fit? Like it's, there's nothing wrong with it, and it's not easy. And that it's, for me, it's like, that's the, it's the gift of being human. It's like, wow, like we're finding this stuff out. And older women, like that we have a role to play in holding the younger generations in, you know, in we again, we like, what's happened is you go to women's circles and often it's all women of the same age. And I,
Yeah.
you know, I've been
Yes.
to some where I'm in the middle, and there's some, you know, there's some late teenagers, and then there's some like 70-odd-year-olds, and the depth of what's shared, it's mind-blowing. When we need all generations. Like we need kids to be interested in their grandparents' stories, and grandparents to be interested in the kids' experiences now. And it's hard now because, you know, if you go back 100 years, the life that you were living wasn't really that different to potentially what your grandparents lived. Like
Yeah.
you know, the difference wasn't so great now. Whereas now with technology, you know, grandparents often, you know, the kids are like, you know, babies are on iPads.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
grandparents don't even know what an iPad is, kind of thing, you know. So it's like, how do we find the common ground again where we can meet? And you know, and it's through it's the heart stories, it's telling the stories of our experiences that's important. So, you know, all hail the crone. Like you know,
Oh,
I'm
yes.
coming into that, and I, you know, and I can see how I in my life have like poo-pooed older women, like, oh, what do you know, old woman, kind of thing. Because that's what I was conditioned to believe. And also because older women haven't been given the opportunity to be of value. You know, wisdom, just because we're old doesn't mean that we're wise, that we're an elder. It's like
Yeah.
we do have to put the work in. um and then it's like, what, you know, what do we do with that? So, you know, for me, it's about sharing this work. It's about supporting younger women to you know, to look inside, to do the shadow work, to do the hard work, to hold them through that. um you know, asking the right questions, the inner inquiry that we need to make, because it's through the shadows that we get to the light, right? We can't avoid it. We have to know grief. You can't be a wise elder, you can't be a crone unless you've done your grief work, your rage work, your fear work, you've faced death, you know, all of this stuff. It's like we run to the hills from it, because
Yeah.
we're, you know, no one wants to feel that stuff. Of course we don't want to feel it. We want pleasure. We want, you know, we want life to be good. But there's something when we feel it in community, when we feel it in circle, it's somehow, it's not so bad. And I know that might sound crazy, but
No,
because
no.
we've all
I
got it.
agree.
We've all
Yeah.
got it. We've all got our own versions of it. And when we share it, we realize we're not alone, and it takes the sting out, and we find the beauty in it. You know, there's one of a great teacher for me around the topic of death is Stephen Jenkinson. And I think his website's called Orphan Wisdom, if anyone's interested. But you know, his saying is, death is the cradle of life. Like if we haven't contemplated and faced death, if we don't have a relationship with death, if death isn't somehow part of our awareness and our lives, we're not fully living. We're just running from death. We're just distracting ourselves. So
I'm writing on death at the moment for a book that I'm doing, and I absolutely agree with you, and I'll look into that because I couldn't agree more. I feel like making friends with death helps you live.
yeah.
Actually makes living more richer and more rewarding. I mean, just there's one thing I wanted to hark back to on that conversation, Callie, which is about the elders and about some of the kind of collective issues that we've got. Really briefly going to just touch on this. It's really funny because I don't want to kind of a bit of ancestral healing I'm doing is I've got a grandma, she'll never listen to this so I can say this, who still is obsessed with aging, plastic surgery, things like that.
Yeah.
But fortunately my mother, sorry, is, you know, she is like an embodiment of the crone and you know, and so we've talked about menopause, we talked about aging. I feel well equipped on that through the relationship with my mum. And you know, it's funny for her because she didn't have anyone to give her that. She's got the opposite with my grandma. But I feel like a little bit for perhaps my generation, every generation had their own kind of collective issues with growing up as a female. Thinking back on the 90s, at the moment, I'm doing a lot of deprogramming with myself around back in the 90s, we had the whole Ledette culture. We were all trying to drink, you know, our male counterparts under the table. We were all trying to look like porn stars, you know, like Jordan and different, you know, Anna Nicole Smith and people like that. And I know that still happens today, you know, it happens in every generation. But I think for me, it's like now with a 16-year-old, we've talked so much about dressing for yourself and not necessarily for others or for men, or you know, and me having to really deprogram myself in regards to, am I wearing this for myself or is it for the eyes of a man and things like that, which sounds ridiculous just saying it out loud, but it's there, like it's really ingrained, you know. And what you said about either, you know, Callie's beautiful, by the way. I'm looking at a picture of her as we're doing this Zoom interview. But I understand what you mean about aging and coming to terms with yourself and your different place in the world, because yeah, it's certainly sort of a theme that I've been looking at, and you know, looking at my side of my journey, but also with my daughter at 16. And I feel it's so important that we have these conversations with our parents, our grandparents, about navigating each different stage, like the menopause, which can be terrifying if you've never, you know, if you're ahead of it. If it's ahead of you rather, even for things like with our younger girls, like before they come to the age of periods, like really talking them through what to expect, and so they're not there just, you know, with blood appearing thinking that they're dying and so on. Like I think these conversations are ones that throughout history, you know, we've really, many of us have shied away from, and they are so powerful, especially as connection topics, which can be difficult but very needed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What a lucky woman you are to have the mother that you do. And
Oh, so lucky.
yeah, it's, you know, it's there's no, it's like, you know, we are where we are, and it's seeing how things are passed down. And you know, your grandmother is like that because that's how she was taught to be in order to
Yeah,
survive, you know. That's
yeah,
that's important. Like my mother's the same. She's in her 80s. She's like, she's so well dressed, and you know, she's always got her jewelry on and nice clothes, and it matters to her how she looks, because that was, you know, that was how she was conditioned, that was the life she led, and it served her well. And so it's like, it's tenderly, this work, it's tender, this work, you know. It's like not judging or criticizing
yeah,
so much, but just understanding, and then questioning for ourselves, who am I, who do I want to be, what feels right for me. And you know, we all want to fit in somewhere, we all want to belong.
yeah,
um
yeah,
but we need to have, you know, it's the work to strengthen our own identity of who we are and what we're here for, and where we want to put our energy and our time, and how we want to contribute to our community or to society. Like, where can we add value? How can we be a good person? How can we be a good ancestor? You talked about story, like the stories that we hear of people. Like, what are the stories you want future generations to tell about you? Ultimately, what's most important is our relationship with ourselves, and finding who we are and what matters to us, and how we want to dress. And like, anything goes these days, really.
Yeah.
Unlike the Victorian times,
Yeah.
things are much more open, so we can, there's lots of different styles, and maybe we'll be a ladette for a while, and maybe we'll be more Jordan for a while, and maybe, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. It's like, it's all part of the journey, the experimentation. And I think it's for the elders, it's for the wise women to hold the knowing that life is a journey. And just because you were a ladette when you were 21 doesn't mean you're going to be a ladette forever.
Exactly that. And
You
it's very
know?
much like also the message of live and let live. I think it's understanding when, because I'm all for you do what you want to do. If you want to go and, with my nan, like whatever she wants to get done, it's differentiating. Are you with me? This is coming back to how I'm reflecting on things for me as well. Like kind of that similar message. Am I doing this for me, or am I doing this for that old kind of instilled belief I've got that is very kind of media, or it's very much been drummed into me. I must look like this, I will be more attractive if I do this. Am I dressing like this? Am I wearing this? I guess we could say that with anything we want to get done to ourselves, or how we want to look, and am I doing it for me? And I guess as well that comes back to when we were talking about funnily, talking about the Hyacinth Bouquet member of my family who eradicated people from the timeline. It's funny because the people that she's eradicated are the ones that my side of like my family are like, oh, but they're really interesting. Like they're the ones I actually want to find out about, because normally they've done something pretty scandalous or interesting. And we're like, I love a misfit. I love the outcasts because they're the ones that resonate with how, a little element of my own energy, I guess. So, which is why I think by kind of looking back through this is really, it's fascinating, because you do find members of family that you're like, I really relate to you. Like, I feel your spirit is still there. And we're going to have ancestors, hopefully, that might look at us and think, oh my goodness, look at how they were meant to be like, and how they might have changed the path of our family's history. And maybe they relocated, maybe they married into this mad family, or all these different things that we might do that will be very interesting for our future ancestors to look back on. So we are also part of this tapestry of our family and our lineage and ancestors.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe your role in the family dynamic is to bring back the wild, and bring in the rebel.
Oh, I hope so.
break the patterns, break the patterns of having to conform.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings you back to, like you were saying about the witch title. As I've got further into it, I think I've also questioned, am I a witch, or am I a woman who just loves the aspect of being the misfit, the outcast, the one that was classed as different? Does that make sense? Over I'm always very humbled along on my witchcraft journey, or just my journey as a woman in general, my journey through life. And I'm always happy to go back and look at things that I might have been very vocal on before and think, am I this? Am I that? What is my craft? How does this relate to what I'm doing now? And not everybody is comfortable. And I know we might talk a little bit on this in regards to the work that you're doing, Callie. Not everybody is comfortable with the title witch, because in times of old it was given as a derogatory word, like an awful word to hear about yourself. So there is a lot of wounding still with that word anyway. I think this is kind of a key time, Callie, for me to ask you. Another area that you talk a lot on within your work is around the archetype of the witch. What can you share with us in respect of that, and also how it relates to the work that you're doing currently?
Okay, so oh gosh. So archetypes are, so the word witch, yes, there's like, for some of us, it's really easy. It's like, yes, I'm a witch and I love being a witch. And we can take the name, with ease and with pride, and it's a really positive thing. And then for others, like there is still a lot of fear in the collective around the word, because if you were called a witch in the past, like none of the women that were persecuted, or people, men too, none of the
Yeah,
people persecuted as witches would have called themselves witches,
yeah,
right? So being called a witch could lead to your death. So for me, it's a question of identity, and it's been a really interesting journey to explore, like, what does it mean and how do I feel about it? And like, if someone asks me if I'm a witch, I'm like, it depends who's asking and why,
yeah.
um so my work over the last few years has been gathering women to understand what happened during the witch hunts, the burning times, and understand how the trauma from those times is passed down through the generations. And basically, what trauma does is separates us. So I talk about 3 wounds of separation: from self, from nature, from each other. So my work has been around understanding that and beginning to heal that, and it's a lifelong journey. But one of the things I offer is an 8-week online course called Healing the Burning Times. I'm going to start another round of it in September, so if anyone's interested, you can have a look on the website and find out more about that. So we connect with we start by putting the roots down, connecting with our ancestors way back, reconnecting the lineage, the blood lineages, and then so that we've got support before we head into the burning times, and then facing into the trauma wounds of separation. So it's kind of like it's a journey, right? I take you on a journey, and there's lots of invitations for you to do things like homework, things to think, things to bring into your own practice. So that can be quite a good place to start. What's now coming through is this piece around archetypes. So it's like, okay, there's a witch's revival happening. Like, more and more of us are being called to the witch, right? There's we see that on Instagram and Facebook, and like this, your amazing podcasts, like, it's gone wild, and
Oh,
there's
thanks, Callie.
others, and there's so many more books. When this came through for me in 2017, 18, or whenever, like, there were hardly any books about witches, and now,
Yeah,
like, you go,
yeah,
there's like thousands. So there's something's happening, like it's coming up again in the collective. And at the same time, these are really difficult times, right? There's a lot of change happening, there's a lot of confusion, things are breaking down, like, we don't, the political system, the education, the NHS, like, our whole world is changing. It's yeah, we're in chaos. And
yeah,
when in times like that, like, we're part of the collective, so we're feeling it, right? There's an energetic field that we're part of. It's like the water we're swimming in. It's when there's so much change and confusion, it can be really easy to lose ourselves, to
yeah,
lose connection with who we are and what matters and what's right. And archetypes are a fantastic, a really powerful way of helping us know who we are and who we want to be. And so and an archetype is like, it's the original pattern, it's the original form of something. It was a concept and a term coined by Carl Jung back in the early 1900s as he started to evolve depth psychology. And it's a pattern that's universally recognized. So mother is an archetype. The hero is an archetype. The villain is an archetype. Like when I say those words, they evoke an image and a feeling in everybody. Like we can imagine what the mother is. We can imagine what the hero is. So with the witches, like we talk about the healer and the midwife and the crone, and you know so they in themselves are archetypes. So
Yeah.
what I'm kind of doing now is pulling that together into a journey that, so it's like we heal the wounds, but then how do we really empower ourselves? How do we step into more of our, you know, what it means to be a witch? So I'm working on so we've got a 4-day event coming up called the Witches Revival. It's in Lancaster on the anniversary of the Pendle Witch trials. So we're going to honor the Pendle witches and then have like a whole lot of workshops and talks and an emporium, and we've got a live show. And what's at the heart of it is it's not really an exhibition, it's an experience. So you're going to come into a big room. It's like the witch's house. You're going to come into the witch's house and you're going to meet the archetypes of the witch, and there's 7 of them, and they spell the word witches. So we've got wise woman, intuitive, temptress, creatrix, healer, earth keeper, and sister. And it's almost like the witch is at the center of all of those, and all of those sub archetypes, if you like, are aspects of who we are as a witch, as we are working to claim our identity or reclaim our identity and step into our work in the world as a witch. Like these sub archetypes, if you like, can help us find that power and knowing and wisdom. So you come into the room and you visit. There's like an installation for each one, the world of each one, and and it's done in a way that's participatory. So there's invitations for you to answer questions and write things and do things and make offerings and ritual and stuff. So it's kind of going to be a beautiful, a sacred space. Like it's a place for us to ask some of the deeper questions, just to sit, to contemplate who we are and how each of these archetypes show up in us or don't. Like maybe they're repressed in us, like the temptress. Like loads of people go, oh, you know, don't like her, and that's because of the conditioning. But actually there's a side of the temptress that's really powerful and needed. So like all of these archetypes have something positive to offer us. So that's that. It's called Return of the Witches, and it's like an experiential exhibition, if you like. So that's going to be at the heart of the revival. And then, so you say you come in and you want to get to know your healer in more depth. You want to find out more about your wise woman, for example. Then all of the talks and the workshops are designed to help you do that. And we have some phenomenal people coming. Like I reached out to women I knew that were working deeply, that knew their stuff, that were experienced at holding the space for all of the shadow stuff to come up, as well as as the gateway to empowerment. So we've got Lucy Pierce coming over from Ireland. I don't know, lots of your readers will know her books,
Yes.
Burning Woman and Moontime and Creatrix. And so she's coming with a couple of her authors, Sarah Robinson, who's written Yoga for Witches, and Carly Mountain, who works with the Inanna story of descent and rising and sex magic. We've got the Seed Sisters coming up, all about herbal connection and medicine. We've got Edwina Hodkinson, who's and Tammy Brett, who are doing things about menopause. We've got talks on death, on the historical aspects of the witch hunts. We've got a woman coming. There's 2 women coming to do a talk about the modern day witch hunts in Africa and India. We've got someone talking, she's just written a book about the Pendle story, so she's going to be talking about that. Like, it's like I want to be in every single session. It's like
Me
we've
too.
got there's dance workshops, there's receipt book workshops. That's an ancestral connection piece. So some kind of unusual things. It's not just kind of yoga and Reiki and all chilling out together. It's like, this is a place where we can come together. We'll start each day with a big session, a big opening ceremony. We'll all get, drop the inhibitions, get to know each other, set our intentions for the day, and call in the ancestors. And then off we go to work. There's 3 workshops and talks each day that you can attend, and there's like a choice of 4 running at the same time. And then we have a beautiful emporium, which is, our theme is reclaiming what we lost. So it's about reclaiming the parts of ourselves that we've lost, and some of the old skills and crafts. So we've got a beautiful emporium of creative women that are making and crafting and high quality stuff like baskets and artwork and books and skincare and jewelry and all of that. So that's going to be really beautiful. And then 2 of the women there's 4 of us that are bringing this, that are working on this together. So Lindsay Tidbury and Sarah Carter they've written a whole show. Lindsay's a songstress with a voice that just heals the soul, like it's honey to the heart. She's just got this incredible gift. And Sarah Carter is a somatic movement facilitator and a dance artist, and with years of experience in choreography and dance and theatre. The 2 of them have written a new live show called Witch Story. So it's, like, you've heard of his story, we've heard of her story, now this is Witch Story. So that's going to be a really powerful evening. And Paula is the 4th member of the team, Paula Fox Valsler, who her work's all about the nude awakening, so reclaiming the temptress. So she's co-organizing, but also bringing some of her temptress energy to it. So we're 3 days in the story in Lancaster, opposite the castle, for all of that. And then on the 4th day, on the Sunday, which is the actual anniversary of the hangings, we're having a day of remembrance. So we start at the gardens, and then we're gonna go to the castle. We're gonna have a ceremony for the Lancaster witches, and then we're going to take a sacred walk, a pilgrimage walk, from the castle up to Gallows Hill, which is now called Williamson Park. Have a picnic lunch and a whole load of kind of ritual celebration. It's like the morning is the serious honoring part, and then we do a bit of dancing, and we come into celebrating the reclamation of the witch in ourselves in the afternoon. So yeah, it's a big thing, and you can come for 1 day, you can come for 2 days, you can come for 4 days. The Saturday tickets there's not many left for workshops. If you just want to come on a general admission ticket, they're £20. For that, you get into the Return of the Witches archetype realm, which you could spend all day in there. There's enough in there to fill a day if you're going to go deep. And then you get into the emporium and then into the garden. So we're going to create a beautiful garden for sharing, and we've got an ancestral yurt and a red tent, and the sitting around the fire. So for 20 quid, you can come and do a few years of therapy.
I love that.
And just I hope anyway, and just be in the energy of a woman's space, and all are welcome, but it is predominantly a woman's space, and of sisterhood, of support, of sharing our stories, of dropping the masks, getting real, we're going to laugh together, we're going to cry together, we're going to sing, we're going to, when women gather, magic happens, as they say. So that's the Witches Revival in a nutshell.
You
And
can also
yeah,
have a week's, you can have access, can't you, for all the days? Because one thing I wanted to say is for everything that's being done here, the prices are amazing. When I first looked at everything that you can, obviously in the show notes, I'm going to put links for everything so you can see what's on. I am beyond excited. There is so many things that I want to go to. Honestly, I couldn't get over. This is the first event in ages that I've been to that is a witchy one, and I'm incredibly excited. And it's not just going to be for, if you don't class yourself as a witch, I don't think you need to be practicing witch. So if you are a witch and you've got muggle friends that you want to bring along, there's something in it for everybody. I just am so overwhelmed with, I'm just amazed at all the exciting things that are going to be happening, and I'm going to be there for the whole 4 days, so I'm very excited. And there couldn't be anyone more respectful to honor, obviously, the Pendle with the remembrance of this. I think Callie is like the best person to do this work, because she's very sensitive to how how this affects women today, how this affects all of us today, but also, the way that you've set this out, the way that it's been created, I think it's incredibly respectful. You've made it accessible for everybody. It's not. I just think it couldn't have been done by somebody better, to be honest.
Oh, thank you. And I feel pretty honoured that you're going to make the trip all the way from the other side of the country just to come and be with us, and it's going to be great to have you. And yeah, it's a calling, right? I've had women emailing like, oh, I've just seen this, I've got to come. So it's a calling, and you don't have to identify as a witch to find it useful, of course. So
Absolutely.
yeah, it's exciting. 2 weeks to go now, so come and if
Get
anyone's
your
called,
tickets,
get your
run,
tickets.
don't
Yeah,
walk, get your
yeah.
ticket. And if you are a witch, oh my goodness, I think we're going to be like in witch heaven. It's going to be witchy as hell. No, honestly, I'm genuinely excited. There are some amazing people here. I'm also very interested in the course that you're doing. I recently signed up to your is it Hollow the Bones, that you did the ancestral ceremony. So I've been following Callie's work for over a year before you did the exhibition last year, and I wanted to reach out to you before, but when I saw the Witches Revival, I had to. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm just so interested in what you're doing, and it's so needed. Basically, it's just so needed, and I love that you are, bringing together not only all the people doing the workshop, but I just feel that there's going to be so many interesting conversations and healing and so on that comes from it. I think. I know. Yeah, definitely.
It's a place, like-minded women, and then there's something about us all, like when we feel we're not alone, when we feel like we're connected to this, and there's support for it, then that's how we take our magic out into the real world. It's like, how do we take what we're learning, what we're practicing out into the out of the workshop and into the real world? That's the thing. It's like it's time for action. It's time to bring your gifts, and we need support for that. So that creating that sense of support is also kind of at the heart of it. So yeah.
And if anything, I hope this podcast interview has helped some of our witches to aim to be the wild women in the ancestral timeline for the future ancestors.
Yes, the wild women are needed for sure. The earth keepers are needed. Yeah.
Well, from one wild woman to another, I'm so grateful you came on, Callie. There are so many, I know I'm going to listen back to this, there are so many nuggets of wisdom and things that you've inspired me with, and I'm sure all our listeners. So thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.